All right, cool. So today, guys, we got my neighbor, Mark Sylvester. He is a car guy. He's got a cool Fox body. My neighbor, which is a cool one. He is a doctor, but kind of a scientist as well. Probably more scientist, I would say, from our conversations. But then your practice would probably say a doctor. You have a practice, local, a couple of them. You practice, from my limited knowledge of medical, you practice differently than most doctors, and you actually dislike most medicine and how medical practice is done, which is cool. You kind of are on a first principle, what's wrong with this person, not how do I, give them a drug or surgery or something along those lines. And then we've also talked about all the obscure topics that are sensitive, but the sensitive ones are probably the more important ones to talk about because nobody else talks about them, but there's pseudoscience as well, things like COVID, vaccines, fertility rate, heavy metal, mold, 5G, all the weird things, vibrations. And then we talk about all kinds of cool physics stuff. And so it's just a great, well-rounded person that I'm excited to bring on the show. What degrees exactly do you have? Like, what are your qualifications to get that started?
All of them. No.
That's how I felt when we were talking about them.
I've done a lot.
Did I miss anything on that
in
intro?
my life? No, and I appreciate you having me here in the crucible, the inner sanctum of your mind, The traffic was horrible getting across our yard.
Yeah, just kids and stuff. And
yeah, I tripped over a dog.
Yeah, exactly.
No, so it's always awesome to talk to you and to get to know you since you've been here and like-minded thinker. And for a guy almost half my age, I'm always really impressed with the content and the places you go. But I guess how I ended up here, I started out life, I'm originally from Sarasota, so kind of grew up locally, got into engineering in college, studied a lot about how things worked. I loved cars. I would always get the complaints from my neighbors about being out there at 2 in the morning grinding an axle or, making some racket generally. And so one of my neighbors is like, hey, we use all these same tools in the OR. You should come, do orthopedics, go to medical school. I'll give you a job. And so I was like, okay.
Yeah, sounds like it pays well.
Then I met surgeons, and I met doctors, and I realized, you know what? I'm wired like a car guy. I'm an engineer. I'm a tinkerer. I'm a thinker. I like to understand. I like to do things on my own. I love working with my hands. It takes me outside of myself. And then I kind of laterally got into behavioral health, like neurology, psychiatry. And then I got really sick 10 years ago with what we've talked about before, a mercury burden. And none of my colleagues had the slightest clue what to do with it or how to treat it. So then I went back and did a bunch of functional medicine, healed myself first, and a long road to hoe, and really started asking the similar type of questions the way we approach a car, but with one of the most complex machines we know, our human body and our brain.
Yeah, so, it feels like we don't know anything about it, really.
The more we know, the more we realize we don't know.
Yeah, like a mysterious thing. And that's what I like when I talk to you. And plus you have 4 kids.
That I know of.
Yeah, that you know of. You guys are more on the side of new age stuff, but it's, my generation feels like it's going that way a lot more, where they're distrusting everything, which is going to go to a fault, I see, because you can only distrust so far until you go full circle and you're back in the Stone Age of not trusting anything.
Yep.
So I could see it going to a fault, but you guys kind of balance that.
You guys also have a tremendous amount of access to information at a speed that boggles most of the people's mind currently living on the planet.
Yeah.
That didn't grow up with it. They're in countries without that level of technology. The biggest complaint now is my kids will ask a question and I'm like, whip your iPhone out of your back pocket. The sum of all human knowledge is right there.
Yeah.
There's no more libraries. There's no more Dewey Decimal. There's none of this having to do a research project. The scary part about that, we've talked, is the unreliability of the information on the internet. And how do you know what to believe? And can we even agree on an objective truth anymore? Not just politically, but whether the moon's round or there or placed by aliens, or is the earth flat? I mean, all of the big questions and the truths are out there, But there's also so much information that I worry about how you guys sift through that and sort that out and kind of say, you know what, I generally have to distrust everything and intuitively know what works for me and kind of what resonates with me and what I've seen in my own life and experience. So that's cool for you.
It's cool. Absolutely. Overwhelming for sure, and scary because, you know, we've talked about this. People are pretty easily in a hole manipulated, and not because, you know, individually people are stupid. It's just people are in a hole easy to manipulate. I mean, it's proven throughout history. It
brings the whole algorithm idea up and the concept of essentially artificial intelligence in its current form, tailor-making autonomously how to decide, divide, and assimilate information to its particular user, and for what purpose. I personally think it's mostly for advertising, for clicks, for attention, for engagement.
Yeah.
That makes the most sense to me. What else can it be used for? That's where you really kind of go down the rabbit hole of, whoa, can we ever put this genie back in the bottle, and where's it going to end?
Yeah, I mean, you can manipulate people pretty well. Little side note, because I know you're also interested in 3 Mile Island.
Oh, yeah.
They're firing it back up just to power Bill Gates' AI. And it's like, all of that just seems so wrong. Every line of that headline just seems so scary.
Yeah, a lot of words.
3 Mile Island, Bill Gates, AI, all together. It's like, great.
And we talked about this before. The people who are the most afraid of AI are usually some of the most intelligent people. Like before I was even thinking about AI, worrying about AI, you had big thinkers going, the greatest threat to civilization is AI. Like I'm more worried about that than nuclear war and, you know, famine and all of the other stuff that we think of as civilization threatening events. AI is what they're the most worried about. So I got like, maybe I should be more worried. And then I really started learn more about it. At the same time, I'm using ChatGPT today at work to whip up a quick, you know, presentation in less than 5 minutes. So learning how to integrate that into a culture that's never had it before is kind of an ominous, overwhelming task based on regulatory stuff. A country like ours is wildly different than China and everything in between. So how do you figure that out, and who's making those decisions?
Yeah, you can't really even like predict that stuff at all, because what it's going to do to medical, financial, military, there's too many things to even hear somebody start to speculate like 10 years out on it, where you're almost guaranteed to just undershoot it.
And 10 years is like 10,000 years in human evolution. So AI is learning and evolving at a geometric rate that you can't even really compare on the same logarithmic scale as evolutionary biology. Like we've been out of the forest for probably since Younger Dryas, you know, maybe 10, 12, 13,000 years ago.
Yeah.
30,000 if you really go back, like, okay, no, the Homo sapiens began here. AI and what it's done in my lifetime is just blistering that evolution.
Yeah.
And so what are the guardrails? Who's innovating it? What are, like you said, your applications of it? Who's asking these questions?
And then
why?
You get to see this stuff on a different level because you actually deal with people's brains and how they like actually interface with these things. Even like we've talked about the COVID brain and like I think actually TDS is like a very real thing as well, the Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
However you feel about him, both sides have the same syndrome of the love or hate.
Well, and just that dichotomy in the black and white thinking, which is a primitive coping skill. It's a sign of like when we stress, we regress, and we're stressed. We've been like unusually stressed since the pandemic. And whether you're talking about political ideology, whether there's neurobiologic underpinnings of that, or on a larger scale, just how people interface with stress, interface with emotion, how they self-regulate, what their culture will tolerate and not tolerate. Like Russia has a very different, tolerance policy for a lot of things than America. And there's pros and cons to both. So it's hard to say like, well, something's good or bad when it can change from not only culture to culture, but time to time.
Yeah.
I think dumping McDonald's and a lot of the first world stuff that we have in sub-Saharan Africa would do them a great disservice. but it seems great, you know. Or we talked about the argument of the bomb, you know, whether it saved lives or destroyed lives. That's something 75 years later historians still debate very hotly.
Yeah.
And I think the results of COVID and the way that it's forced people to look at their life, their health, their sanity, their tolerance for frustration, their love of their neighbor, that all changed. And I saw it more objectively than like my kids who just kind of grew up in this insanity.
I know. I think about like my son, like he was born post-COVID.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't even, you know, like we talk, there's like benchmarks for every generation. There's like Kennedy assassination, moon landing, 9/11, and COVID. Those are kind of the benchmarks. COVID was a tough one because it was like 4 years of dragged out. Like my sisters, they missed most of high school, some of college. Like,
and we have no idea.
There was like a time warp for them.
Yeah, and I think that contributes not only to their loss in education and the more obvious things, the economic impact, all the stuff that we just sort of understand kind of conceptually, but we have no idea pragmatically how it's changed the course of the development of our civilization. But their confidence, their ability to socially engage, their obsessive fears about germs and contamination kind of gets locked in a normal developmental thing. Like we all went through the step on your back, break your mother's back phase. What if a global pandemic happened when you were at that suggestive time? You know, you've got kids that might have a life with OCD that they otherwise would not have. Like we don't understand a lot of these large-scale stressors in the development, and you can kind of drive yourself crazy thinking about it, but I love talking about it.
No, I mean, there's so much depth to it, and the problem is I'm sure people are going to study it in 10 years, and it's going to be debated in 10 years, but it's going on now. So like the implication of it is now, even if we understand it 10 years from now, like my sister that was in high school, she's gonna be 30 years old. You're not gonna be able to like actually help that situation. And then we've even talked about some of the stuff that you see with IQ loss from just having COVID. And
that's 100%. Even within the first year of the pandemic, there were studies showing like, oh, it's going to drop your IQ 10 points. And I'm thinking like, how do we know that already? How have we proven that already? And more importantly, what is IQ? What does it mean? Is it how intelligent you are, or is it your ability to learn? What does that translate developmentally? You know, when a brain's going till 25 years old and it's doing this pruning process, the hit to 10 IQ points is probably better than a 40, 60, 80-year-old person who then now is cognitively impaired, who now has dementia where they otherwise wouldn't, and everything in between.
That is actually extra scary, thinking of a 50-year-old person losing 10, 60, 70, 80-year-old person suddenly having this slip of 10 IQ points when you kind of need it most as you start to lose it regardless. Like I think about my grandparents, and it's like,
post 25, it's all downhill, man.
Oh, well, shit, I'm about to be 30.
Yeah, it's all downhill.
All downhill.
And that's pretty well agreed on, you know, in the scientific literature, that there's continuing wiring up until about 25. The frontal lobe, the newest part of our brain embryologically, evolutionarily, is the frontal lobe. It's what we define as human. It's why we can have a podcast. It's why we can have schedules and planning and a lot of this executive functioning. So it's also one of the first areas to start to go bad. And with age, normal age-related cognitive decline, any of the dementias, which a lot of which are not just named after a dead white guy. They're actual toxicokinetic processes from 3 Mile Island, from glyphosates, from organophosphates, pesticides, plastics, dyes, heavy metal, all this stuff we've talked about before is injuring the brain. It's inflaming the brain. It's like static on the system. It's kind of like track conditions, right? When you're under 25, you got that sweet spot. You got the perfect air temperature. You got the perfect sunlight, the perfect track temperature, the perfect tire PSI. It's all downhill after that.
And so, then that brings the question, how do you reverse any of this stuff? How do you start to, because, if it's in the water, how do I make sure my son doesn't have it? If it's in everything he eats, how do I try to avoid it? Am I just locked into a system and have no control over it?
I think the first thing you do is remove the offending agent. So, and being, talking about your son, being cognizant of what's going into his brain, what's going into his body, through mom, whether that's through breastfeeding stages, through your environment. Are you in a dirty, filthy home with parasites and mold? And, are you drinking from the tap or whatever, and you're getting more fluoride and all of the, like even Prozac is in our water supply. You can actually measure it. These are things that the water systems don't even try to remove. They remove other contaminants, but they'll flat out tell you all of the pills and pharmaceuticals, they're all in there. Tiny amounts that they think don't do anything. Tell that to the entire field of homeopathy, which that's a whole practice of medicine built on, these larger effects with tiny, minute doses. So I think, having a doctor that you can have an intelligent conversation about vaccines, like that is still such a hot topic. COVID vaccine was one thing, and that's sort of understandable because it was during a crisis, it was during a global pandemic. This was a new untested vaccine design. There were a lot of questions, and no one wanted to talk about it. It was offensive to even. And it's still hot, but it's not as hot as it was. I mean, I'm still treating patients in my practice for like PTSD, the same type of PTSD they would have gotten from a single event, rape or war, battle, whatever, from having vaccines literally forced on them or so heavily encouraged, threatened. It violated one of hypocrisy's four corner principles of autonomy and doing no harm, because not every vaccine is right for every person at every time in their life.
Yeah.
Especially like the kids now, they just get this crazy, crazy schedule of vaccines. And you got to really think about, what are you asking the immune system to do here? And what is it capable of doing? And where is the actual large-scale evidence proof that the benefits are outweighing the risks? Because I see a lot of injuries.
Yeah, well, even like if you have a small child and you ask them like, why does my child need a vaccine for an STD as soon as he comes out of the womb? They're gonna be combative.
Oh yeah.
Like they're fully combative on it. And it's like, what are the chances of my child getting an STD from my wife that doesn't have one? You tested her.
And compare that to what are the risks of exposing a nascent immune system to an artificial exposure. In other words, like take COVID, since we already entered the algorithm for that. If you got infected, if I inhaled COVID back in the beginning of the pandemic, before there was vaccines, for instance, one virion particle gets turned into two, and then it has to slowly replicate. There's an arc with your immune system that compensatorily slowly ramps, right? And then it meets somewhere in the middle, and it either, you either beat it or you get sick. You either don't know you're sick because your immune system took it out, or you get sick to some degree. You notice a symptom, right? Mm-hmm. With the vaccine, and this is the way they're purposely designed, but as part of the problem, you're introducing this huge initial exposure. It didn't have that ramp-up period. You walloped them with a really high dose. Let's say it's an inactive vaccine. We can get into the different types of vaccine. You're asking their immune system to literally do like a John Forrest launch, like or a fighter pilot turn, just cram. And that rate freaks out the immune system in some people. Just like the rate, and you've probably seen this with CJ, the rate of temperature change when they get sick determines whether or not they have a seizure. It's not the level, like, oh, they have 105, they're going to have a seizure. They can have a seizure at 101 because they went from 99 to 101 super quick. So there's this temporal effect that never seems to even enter the conversation. It's weird. It's illogical. Like as a car guy, as an engineer, applying those principles, which I'm very fond of, and it's the way I'm wired, and it's the way how I bring passion to my practice and understanding like why. They don't even want to have that conversation. That bothers me. Like that concerns me. That either they're ignorant, they're brainwashed from their training, or they're somehow influenced or controlled by an outside force, whether that's time, whether that's financial incentive. You know, people speculate on a lot of this. I can tell you what in my practice and my experience what's true and what's not true, and why I do what I do, and how much more effective and rewarding and, more importantly, not harming people it does.
That's a weird thing to think about, is not harming people with your medical, with helping them. Like, helping them but not harming them is not something most people think about. Most people don't think about the incredible side effects of anything that they're going to do, because they think if it helps their one situation, it doesn't somehow hinder all of these other ones. I was even talking to my buddy about, like, all these, like, supplements he takes, and I'm like, yeah, but you're hurting your kidneys over time. Like, you can't just keep loading your body up with more and more supplements.
Well, that's common sense, and common sense isn't too common, and that's one of the things that impresses me with your generation, that I honestly feel like doesn't have a fair shake in terms of the experience to learn through life on trial and error, and, you know, the hard way. And like I was a latchkey kid, and it's like, you just had to figure this stuff out, you know, be home by the time the street lights are off, kind of thing. To your point about CJ and like what to do, it starts with what we just talked about, avoiding it. And then here's another big gap in the healthcare system. Like, how do you identify that there's a problem? And most of this stuff is still completely denied. Like, I've got Western medicine training. I can tell you I know nothing about nutrition. I know nothing about toxicity. I know nothing about mold or Lyme disease. We've talked about Lyme a lot. Heavy metal burden, which is increasing. We still don't really want to have a conversation about autism and like, why has it gone from 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 8 males? I mean, it's alarming that we can't really have a discourse and a fair conversation about this in a productive way. And then it begs the question, how do we get here? And that's kind of interesting too. You can go down that rabbit hole of, we used to be a lot more balanced in the education, but time is money, technology advanced, the good stuff, the preventative, the health, the wellness, the thinking outside the box was removed for reasons, you know, that vary, and replaced with a lot more of these technological marvels. And never was the question, like you said, you know, should we do this, not can we do this? And what's the true cost to society, to my patient?
Yeah, there's even a deep history of all that too, as you look back to like Rockefeller and what he did to health and education, and everything basically comes from that kind of, I mean, a lot of this stuff kind of always falls back to like JP Morgan, Rockefeller, and like those early tides of industry. Suddenly everything kind of still stems from them, but he had a big part in the health system, and the petroleum industry is so heavily involved in medicine for some crazy
and the
overlap
pharmaceutical
reason.
industry is incredibly powerful, incredibly lucrative, and incredibly confusing, because I'm not an anti-drug or an anti-vaxxer per se. I'm way more conservative than anybody that I know, because I always ask why, and I better be able to explain it to my moral center, my conscience, and my left brain, my motorhead side, is to like, is this going to improve my ET at the end of the track? That's the bottom line. And to walk in with that mindset into the current Western medical model was like, whoa. Their cars they're like in the pits pointed the wrong direction, kind of whoa. And they're not even thinking about ETs. They don't really understand the first thing about manual transmissions versus automatic. I mean, it's that level of crazy Twilight Zone type of interpretation of how we're healing people.
I think like about Elon Musk when he talks about rockets, he always says the best part is no part at all.
Yeah.
Like, if it doesn't need to be there, get it off.
Yep.
And that's kind of how I think about the medicine a little bit too, is like the best medicine is no medicine at all, and just living the way where you don't need to be heavily medicated in your 70s and like have a pill jar that's, 5 feet long because it's filled with so many.
If it improved their quality of life, I'd be all for it. Big pharma all the way. I'd do the talks. I'd go on the TV with the commercials. Not only does it not help most people most of the time, it's frankly injuring them. And so you need more than a one size fits all. I saw a crazy commercial on TV the other day, and it was like I think it was a chicken pox vaccine booster, and it's like, it's lurking inside you, waiting to come out and rape your children.
It's ready.
Ask your doctor.
It's freaking waiting.
And of course, I killed my TV long ago, but it really horrified me. The United States and New Zealand are the only 2 countries on the planet that direct market drugs to their consumers. We were talking about CJ, and once you can identify what these insults, these threats to developing illness and organ damage, which will eventually show up on the Western medical radar as a diagnosis. Oh, you've got psoriasis, you've got asthma. Again, why? That's not a normal state. Most of the time, you can find modifiable factors. And then to your point before, what do you do about it? How do you approach it? If you don't believe in mold, if you don't believe in chronic Lyme, if you don't believe in long-haul COVID, I'm surprised we actually identify long-haul COVID, quite frankly, and POTS and a lot of the syndromes that run along with it. How do you identify a heavy metal burden?
I don't know if I've personally heard enough or much about long COVID, though. I feel like that's still very, maybe because people have so much PTSD from COVID, they just want to pretend long COVID is just like the new state of norm.
Yeah.
But you don't really hear, at least, obviously we have very different circles of people we talk to and listen to probably on a regular basis.
News cycle thing too. No one wants to. COVID was traumatizing. If aliens had invaded and everyone was like, oh, Israel, Palestine, Russia, Ukraine, hunger, gluttony, we'd drop our arms and we would look up Independence Day style and kick them alien asses. That did not happen with COVID. We were all invaded by the same thing. And not only did we not unite in some trauma bonding, we turned on each other. We said hey, neighbor, don't look at me or you're going to kill my grandma. And the fear and the panic in my lifetime, the only thing I've seen that remotely compares was 9/11.
Yeah.
The moment that second plane hit the towers, and I'm like, we're going to do something stupid.
Well, even the repercussions on the government side, we were so willing to give up our freedoms of New York was pretty bad about it, but it was like, oh, your phone, if you're close to somebody else, your phones pick it all up and sends it back to Washington and the Pentagon. And it's like, whoa, everybody. Yeah. Why are we so willing to give this up for a smidge of security?
And
the idea of security.
Everyone gave it up. Like you said, there was a federal push for giving that up with the Patriot Act.
Yep.
I've lived long enough, I learned that whatever the new legislature's name is, it's doing the exact opposite.
Yeah.
They literally just put lipstick on a pig a lot of times. And then the state regulation, like you said, New York, California, they were way tougher, way more big brother. And, they have more metropolitan areas. It affects them as a state or certainly county municipality a lot different than rural Georgia or, the mountains, hills of Tennessee or Hawaii.
But they were digging through septic tanks of colleges and sending that off for samples to see how much COVID was in there. And it's that's crazy to think that we were all on board with that. We need this.
Yeah.
It's the crazy Patriot Act times 1,000 because of technology. And even the legislation names, I was just talking to somebody about No Child Left Behind.
Oh, yeah. That means leave all the kids behind.
All the children got left behind.
Yeah.
None of them got, where they needed to be because none of them could be left behind. It's crazy. And I was probably, growing up, one of those children that probably should have been left behind a little bit because I was slow learner and I'm still slow. So it's
I don't know, man. I've seen your ETs on the Y2K there.
Yeah.
The Y2J.
Exactly.
That
car's fast. I can just let off the button, though.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think whatever you're identifying as slow or a slow learner is probably that you're a more balanced learner. And that's the problem with the school systems as they try to... We all have our unique gifts. We all have our unique skill sets. We're all wired the way we're wired for a reason. You can't stuff all of them into the same, you know, Florida-based learning system model type of thing. You know, some kids do better in Montessori, some do better in gifted, some do better in ESC, some do better in, you know, a military structure. You know, they need more discipline and accountability, and they're going to thrive in the appropriate environment.
And even the thought of sitting down a 8-year-old boy for 8 hours to be like, now you're learning, whether you want to or not. It's like you're sitting there learning is crazy, because boys don't tend to sit still. I mean, girls, I've never been a girl, so I don't really understand. I can't speak for them, but I know none of the boys I was in school with would sit still and learn for more than 10 minutes. You'd get a little bit of it. And there wasn't repetition. You need the repetition.
And then pretty much after lunch, you're screwed.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. So, you know, I have my gripes with education system, and I know you do as well.
Well, even if you just you looked at one class in one area, you know, every kid is at a different pace and a different style learning. You're going to have some smart kids that are bored. You're going to have some dumb kids that are overwhelmed. I mean, it's how you measure what their value is to learning and their learning style and what they bring in terms of, I don't know, what if this kid is the next, you know, great artist or sculptor or leader, and you've got him in some sort of like math science school, or vice versa. Like, that is a travesty. If you really think about how that would derail that kid's life and the development and rob society of someone that would have been great before we you know, kind of put them through this conveyor belt.
Yeah, well, you look at places like, you know, Germany and Russia, they have like 50 times the engineers as us per capita, and it's like, well, something went wrong there.
Yeah.
There's some equation there that went wrong if they have that many more engineers than us. Because, I mean, not to play the importance game, but engineers tend to be more important than a lot of other people in society.
Well, to whom? Too, you know, to the society at large, to their community, their local community, to their own personal development, to pushing the technological advancement of mankind. I mean, all those questions should be considered, and it's just, there's no manual for having kids. You're figuring it out. You know, I'm still figuring it out. I don't know that you ever figure it out. Ask your parents, ask their parents. Yeah. It's part of the joy of and the excitement and the uncertainty and the power of being present and like authentic and real with your kids. It's this great opportunity. And the same is true in the education system. If they are not getting that, if they don't get a good teacher that makes them passionate about something they care about, what does that opportunity cost look like? Yeah. I mean, that's the stuff that boggles my mind, looking at the world through our kids' eyes.
I actually even think about, you know, school a lot too, because there's so much education just on the internet and YouTube and videos and stuff like this. And some of these videos are so good that how could you expect a teacher to even like be equivalent to teach a subject versus like a 20-minute YouTube video that is just ironed out? Yeah. That I'm like, man, like it's almost a disservice to have some person that is probably not as good. It's like watching a documentary or having me explain it to you. Like, of course, the well put together documentary with photos and stuff is going to be more important. And most of school could be, you know, assisted teacher, but like use the good literature, use like the best step forward.
The pace of life has changed so much. Like, you guys can consume information and your attention spans are incredibly short. And I used to think that was all bad. And it was one of the things I noticed about shutting off my TV was I would like go to the dentist's office every couple of years and happen to have the TV on. And I'd be like, why is the angle of the camera change every 6 seconds? It's like distracting and discombobulating to me. And now we're also like slaves to the dopamine push. You've got to have the angle, the content, the view, the person talking, whatever, change like every 3 seconds. So translate that to the classroom, the fact you don't pay teachers crap, the fact that a lot of parents aren't parenting, and so you've got all the discipline stuff. You had COVID happen, force them to become IT people. I mean, it's insane that school, the structure of school still functions at all. And maybe we ought to rethink it because of the advancement of technology, like we were talking about before. Maybe it does make more sense to have them go someplace and do self-directed learning content in a prepackaged way that's more suited to the world that we live in now.
Well, and like the prepackaged way gives you a chance to study if something works. So like, you know, you can try 10 videos on 10 different classrooms and give them a test at the end and see which one worked best.
Yeah, with no variability in terms of the delivery.
That's what I mean. Like
delivery.
You can see which system worked the best, and you don't hear any of that. But of course, it would put teachers out of jobs because, you know, nobody wants to put teachers out of jobs. You just want the kids to be as educated as possible.
But teachers aren't as happy and fulfilled and appreciated and financially compensated as they were 50 years ago.
Yeah.
That's 2 data points. I mean, it's pretty linear. Play it forward 50 years. Are we going to even have teachers? When are we going to start to value them? And like you said, what can they do to provide content, passion, adjust for unique variability, strengths, weakness now in the current like technological infrastructure of the world? Because yeah, you're right. You can a lot of times teach yourself about anything if there's a will, and that was not a concept that long ago.
Yeah, I joke with people all the time because, you know, I'm constantly learning something new, and I'm homeschooling myself on things that I didn't learn that existed when I was in school, but maybe they were briefly passed. I remember looking at a history book. We would get a new history book every year, and we would read like a chapter of it. Like 2 chapters maybe in a whole semester we'd get through of this huge history book. And then it'd be gone the next year, tossed away. I'm like, it's a history book. How much is it changing?
Yeah.
Even the math books, like how much?
Well, that's a whole different thing, the change in the content. You know, my wife is amazing. She was really on board when the pandemic hit about pulling our kids out and homeschooling. And it wasn't driven out of a fear of the virus and like, let's Lysol and do all this stuff. Because, you know, she, through me and through her understanding and common sense and an approach to healthcare and common sense, like it was basically what it came down to, because a lot of that went out the window during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Knowing coronaviruses have been around forever, we know a ton about them. Yeah, that was a freaky one. It still is. It's still hurting people. But it was a situation I honestly disagreed with, like, because I grew up in a very structured, you know, academic environment. I was technically in a program, not a school, at Pineview, and it was a little more tailor-made and sort of a Montessori effect, but I thought that structure, discipline, self-sufficiency, that the only way that could be gotten is in a structured school system, ideally put by the county, and teach them, you know, be there at this time and change in this. And that can come later. What can't come later is the passion and the abilities for self-directed learning and wanting to learn, like you said. If you want to learn something, you go do it. You're homeschooling yourself. And I look at my kids now and I see, you know, how socially adjusted they are. That was the other piece I was worried about. But how smart they are, like how hungry they are for knowledge, how self-directing their knowledge based on their ability to learn, what they're interested in, really does work out. And this is largely an untested, newer model. When I was in school, the homeschool kids were like super weird, and like they had some crazy, you know, boy in the bubble or, you know, a terrible anxiety thing, and teachers went to their house. It was more like tutoring. It was just they were maladjusted. Yeah. And since the pandemic, there's like a whole huge burgeoning field of people that did the homeschool like we did, and then saw the benefits of it. Bringing arts and culture back into school that was kind of tossed out, like the common sense health wellness stuff was in medicine. And then how insurance companies changed that industry, how big pharma changed that industry, how the medical industrial or the medical educational complex changed that industry, how time and overwork. It's like, I'm not going to argue with you about your virus and how antibiotic isn't going to help. I'm going to just give you the stupid thing, get you out of my office because I got 120 other people to see, and I'm not really going to think about antibiotic resistance and MRSA and, you know, other stuff that's not affecting what's right in front of my face at that moment.
Yeah. So there was the push of people during COVID that were more educated than their trusted doctor, at the time, but they would still have to go see their trusted doctor to get the meds that they already had the idea that they wanted and needed, which is crazy in itself to be in that mindset. But it brought out the truly craziest of everything. And you even have told me you still see the lasting effects of the crazy in people.
Well, the reason why we talked about is, and my guess, I'm going to say 5% of people that had COVID, which we all had COVID or were exposed to COVID, and this includes vaccinated and non-vaccinated, because you could be injured equally, in my opinion. They have permanent neuropsychiatric, neurobehavioral symptoms that I think, in addition to the stress of the pandemic and the regression to these more primitive set of coping skills, I think you're still seeing that now. These are the people that, someone gets cut off in traffic and they pull out a gun and blow them away, or tied to the airplane seat, or these really fantastical stories where their neighbors are like, well, seemed like a really nice dude. He just sort of snapped. I think that is end organ damage. I think that's chronic inflammation. I think that's spike proteins in the brain. I think it's immunologic responses. There's a lot of things that the virus and the vaccine itself caused that we're not appreciating. If it can affect 10 IQ points, how does it do that? If it's affecting learning and memory systems, it's affecting your vision, your hearing, your judgment, the prefrontal cortex, frontal lobe, your visual spatial, everything.
Feels like we've all been MK Ultra'd.
We have.
Essentially,
we have.
And planned or unplanned as well. It could have been MK Ultra'd by design.
My late partner and I we had a podcast. I mean, we still have a podcast with my new partner, but we would talk about this. We would say, like, there's some je ne sais quoi of terror that's happening that we can't explain. He was a PhD psychologist. I was an MD psychiatrist. And we're students of human behavior. I love that I could take a car apart, put it back together. I got the same thing. I could do that with a space shuttle, like one of the most advanced machines on the planet. It's going to be the same thing. Taking apart the human mind and understanding behavior, reassembling it, I don't think that ever happens twice. Because there's, not only because of our ignorance, but there's probably other factors and forces at work there. And so we would see these permanent, marked, clear neurobehavioral changes after COVID. You see it similar with Lyme, chronic Lyme. You can get similar types of injury. We talked about pregnancy brain, chemo brain, COVID brain, pump brain. Like
Lyme's is a thing that hits real close to home for me because obviously I grew up on Long Island. Plum Island, whether you choose to believe it or not, is the origin of Lyme disease, and Long Island is rampant with Lyme disease that lays dormant, and then people go and eat red meat, and suddenly they have this crazy reaction to it.
Yeah, like
they
40%.
Lose feelings in their legs, like all kinds of crazy things from this mythical bug that we designed to potentially drop on foreign adversaries.
Dr. Bergdorfer,
against the... It would be a war crime to do it, but we still developed it just in case.
Yeah.
Goes against the whatever accords that
I just left the office and saw a really severely injured chronic Lyme kid from Pennsylvania. He's like 30 years old and just no quality of life. And you can tell he's got the passion. He's got the drive. He's got all of the will to be well. And he's getting misdiagnosed, and he will. I mean, not just in this part of the country, anywhere in the country. Yeah. Unless you think functionally, unless you think integrative, unless you think holistically, unless you think like, why? What caused this? How can I measure it? What can I do about it? When can I freaking start? We're going to just keep pumping money into the TV, into the big pharma, and causing more suffering, more prolonged illness. It's not that those treatments don't have their place. It's just they're misappropriated. They're misunderstood. I mean, even in psychiatry, we've talked like the Prozac works 30% of the time, maybe 35. Let's say 35% of the time. And everyone agrees on this, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, the placebo effect is 30%. This is why cytologists hate psychiatry, because they're like, 1, you're messing people up. 2, you're not helping them. 3, this is the same as placebo. So what about the other 70%? Do you just not think about them? Do you not care about them? Do you not worry about them? Do you not want to understand how you can help them? In my experience, the answer is no. No, I don't. I'm slammed. I've got a full-time practice. I can live a good lifestyle, and I can pump out the du jour big pharma, drug rep of the week.
I was going to say whatever the salesman shows up with.
Pretty much.
That week. It's so sad because we're so highly developed. We spend so much more on health. We spend like 10 times more on healthcare than every other country in the world.
With way worse outcomes.
And that's what is crazy to me. People are always like, free healthcare. It's like, we already spend more. Spending more is not going to help us because, like, it's not a spending issue because...
It's second only to defense. And we spend a ton on defense.
And it's just getting worse because we have this aging demographic. So it's just going to spiral up to be this big thing that we have to deal with. And that's more of a, societal issue than it is like a medical issue. But it's...
You got to deal with it.
That's true.
And our kids got to deal with it.
Yes.
That's scary,
Because, it's no... Like, it's not a made up thing that we are a shrinking demographic of Americans. We're on like a decline because of even when you think about it like anecdotally, my grandpa was like one of like 12, and then my parents were one of like 4, and then I was one of 4, and then now people are like one of 1 or none of none is a lot of what I see. So it's even visible in like 3 generations. Yeah, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, it's crazy to see it within your own lifetime, like as you age, and then, I mean, you've probably seen it already and know what I'm talking about through little CJ's eyes, because one of the coolest parts about being a parent is seeing the world through your kid's eyes, because it's a fresh perspective, and there's so much that you can see through their vision that you've lost sight of or has changed. My kids teach me all kinds of cool new words all the time. Like. Slay, all the good, which is, by the way, already becoming outdated for the next generation. So I pity the fool who has to learn and keep up with the increasing pace of these changes.
It's probably not in my dictionary as the same way that it would be described as your daughter, from your daughters, Yeah. The slay. Bussin'. Exactly.
I like the bussin'.
Sometimes they add those new things, but yeah, that's another issue, though, is, like, I think it's a mental thing, too, is... Pop culture is expanding so quickly and disappearing so like dispersely that people don't even have the same references to things. So like you look at Seinfeld's a great example. The last episode of Seinfeld, it was like 70 million people watched it. Yeah. It ended. Everybody watched it at the same time and they could talk about it. Now it's like there's nothing really like that. Besides maybe the Super Bowl.
Some of this stuff comes back and echoes, like a new generation's watching Melrose Place. My kids are watching Gilmore Girls. Friends had this huge resurgence. And so that's super cool. I'm waiting for the X-Files to make the comeback,
But I guess where I was going with that a little bit more is like people don't have the same references. Like people don't... You can't connect with somebody on the Seinfeld joke that you just saw because, everybody in the world saw it and you were like, oh, perfect. Like, everybody's kind of connected on these small things. Now we're only connected on, like, news and political cycle.
Which is all fear-based.
That's what I mean. Like, the worst of the worst is what everybody sees. COVID, vaccine stuff. Like, you connect on things that are controversial. Almost.
That's especially hard for me because I love movie references and I love like sitcoms, but I quit watching TV 15 years ago. So there's that. Most of that stuff is either lost to the sands of time. I can only speak to your point, like my generation, or I'll use it as an example or a metaphor of life. Or I'll be like, oh, there's this really great show on Netflix. I can't find anybody. Like we watched this show Haven. It's an awesome sci-fi show. I literally have never found anyone else that watched it. Yeah. So I'm like, do they not have the Netflix? Like I hardly ever watch TV. Some of my favorite sci-fi shows, which is kind of what teases my brain in that fantasy science world.
Yeah, I binged a bunch of over the weekend there was a whole... What did they call it? It was basically like 1984, like a post-apocalyptic.
Oh, there's a bunch of
stuff. It was a whole list of all 80s post-apocalyptic. They were really gearing people up in the 80s for post-apocalyptic.
Yeah.
There's a whole thing about like Hollywood gears people up for what they think is coming, and it was
the Russians are always our enemy in those.
Always.
Ever notice that?
Yeah, well, for a little blip, there were not the Russians were the enemies. It was like Middle Easterners.
Yeah, Lebanese.
Yeah. And then it went
like
back
to
Russian.
the Future.
Yeah, exactly. Then it went back to Russians. But yeah, like the pop culture stuff is a worry because people don't connect on these things anymore.
Yeah, and then so how do we connect with each other? And why do we need to? Is it even important? I've learned the hard way. Yeah, it actually is extremely important. Some people are more empaths, they're more highly sensitive people. Women tend to be more intuitive and good at processing information from multiple directions. We all need connection.
Yeah.
We all need purpose, and we all need a sense of fellowship and community. And that's why, I mean, I'm here. I love that you're next door and we can wrench on cars and blow stuff up.
Have these weird conversations that a lot of people in my life and the world don't want to have. Like, I enjoy having like more complex conversations like this about societal, and this is probably why I've brought my family to church, is because we're suddenly craving community more than ever.
Yep.
You know, when I was younger, I was like, oh, whatever, community, like what? Now it's like this probably prehistoric urge of human to crave community, the monkey brain in me that's like, you need to be with a pack of people and not the pack of people that's 8 billion. It needs to be small.
Yeah, well, we didn't evolve to absorb 8 billion people's problems. Yes. We've evolved over the last 30 years to at most handle 20 or 30, like the size of our little village, our nomadic tribe. That's what we can handle. That's what we can process. That's what we're designed for. That's not what we're asking of our brains every time a news cycle. And it gets at you. It gets at you through the TV. It gets at you through social media. It gets at you through all of the different sources. It gets at everybody instantly. I mean, there was a car accident on Fruitville Road the other day, and my wife's like, oh, hey, take another route. I'm like, how do you even know that? How did you know that fast? Like, it's crazy how fast information spreads, which on one hand you could say is a positive. Show me the positive results. Like we can't even get the freaking hurricane warning like alerts to work right. And the flash flood. Remember how many people were pissed off they didn't get notified? Yeah. They were releasing the dam, and they're like, boom, they lost like everything below 4 feet in their house.
Well, and then on the flip side of that, like remember when Hawaii got the missile warning? Yeah, that was a false alarm. Yeah, they got an accidental. There's a missile heading inbound warning from North Korea or whatever I don't know. But what do you do in that situation? You like, that's terrifying. Yeah. If it just came up on my phone, like missile warning.
Whoops, recall message.
Yeah, our bad. Hopefully that didn't cause any damage.
No, but that connection is so important. That's kind of why I do a lot of what I do, because I see so many people that I describe as medical refugees because they don't feel like they can connect. They don't trust their doctor. They don't know enough to interpret all of this variety of crap on the internet. Like you said, are supplements good or bad? Which ones? When? How much? Are they hard on your liver, your kidneys? Like, we need doctors or healers or practitioners. I don't really even care what form they come in anymore. I just want to move the needle on people's health. I want them to physically feel better, be connected more emotionally, spiritually, and like you said, connected to each other through sort of the fellowship and communion and the community of anything. Drag racing. That's one of the reasons why I love it so much. I grew up water skiing and the team sports. Like, that is really important to me, and I didn't really understand that about myself. You know, that's one of the reasons my wife and I make such a good pair, because she's from the sticks and I'm from Sarasota. She thought that was some big city. But I went to Miami for medical school, and I'm like, oh, Carrie, listen, this is what you call a city here. You can't leave your purse on the front seat and the keys in the ignition, and there's going to be mean people here. And I'm like, preparing her, having no clue. She did so much better with her makeup and her skill set. She had thicker skin, kind of like a New Yorker. Somebody cuts me off in traffic, New York, and honks and flips me off. That's going to like wreck my morning. That's just a daily commute for a New Yorker. Like, they're built kind of a different construct and have different boundaries and different ways that people get in and out of their sphere.
Yeah.
And I really struggled in Miami because I no longer had the person at Publix or the post office like saying, hey, how are you? Or holding the door for some little old lady. Like, they look at you like, what, are you going to rob me? Mm-hmm. And to have that taken away, that fellowship, we all endured that during the pandemic. And we're still paying dearly for it. I think it's part of why we're still so angry psychologically and like socioculturally. Forget the neurologic and neuropsych injury and the inflammation and the ongoing, morbidity and mortality and how many people died and were injured by the virus and vaccine.
Yeah, I've even I know we talk a lot about energy and vibrations. I feel like even if somebody doesn't watch the news, lives in a bubble, I feel like there's still an energy in the air, like a tension.
100%.
And of course that could be in my mind because I am immersed in the world of modernity and all this stuff, but I feel it's like a real, almost like you could cut it with a knife. Like tension.
The Germans call it Zeitgeist, the simmering tension of our time. I like that movie with Tom Hanks, Castaway, where I think Tom Hanks during the pandemic on a deserted island was like, geez, I'm experiencing anxiety.
Yeah,
I feel fearful and I don't know where it's coming from. I think, Carl Jung would have called that the collective unconscious. I think we are all connected via our transceivers, the 3 pounds of fat goo in the bony construct of our cranium. And it can both send and receive information. So literally this is like, when HIV was a big thing in the AIDS and we had We Are the World and the world kind of united, that shifts how our emotional awareness, our intelligence, our physiology, our health, whereas we're kind of in a time of a lot more global strife, and it shifts about every 25 years. We've talked about those cycles. And right now is not really the best cycle if you were to qualitatively measure. I think it's a pendulum swinging and depends which way you catch it. Is it stopped up top or is it full speed at the bottom or is it decelerating or is it accelerating? I think we're going through the toughest part of that 100-year cycle or so.
Yeah. And I've talked to other people about this as well, it's like a slow burn, but then everything happens quickly. And that's where I think we're getting close to everything happening quickly with a lot of stuff. You look at our financial system is like on the edge of the cliff, chipping off, and it's getting close. Like things happen quickly, but it's a slow burn, but then it falls. It's like Jenga.
Well, they just dropped the interest rates, and when I was younger, it's like, woohoo, the country's doing great. They're dropping the interest rates. It's like, no, that's actually when we're doing worse, and they're trying to insulate this drop in the economy.
The soft landing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So we don't get 1929s and 2002s. And
well, and the good news, 1929, that ended in a global war, right? That's good news for some, right?
War stimulates the economy.
Yeah, absolutely. We did great after that. Then there's a baby boom. It's almost like that cycle. It's crazy how that works. Every 80 years, I think they say the cycle is.
Yeah, I've seen the 25-year cycle.
Yeah, like a fourth turning.
And how you can overlay it throughout notable events in history, and it's quite compelling.
Yeah,
and I think that's like a ineffable social developmental push, almost like when you're on the interstate, someone touches the brake lights. The guy 3 miles back has got like a 30-mile-an-hour deceleration from some little old lady just bumping her foot in the wrong pedal and not even changing the way, because it's the anticipation and that snake recoil shock effect.
I always try not to. I always try to be the guy that breaks the chain.
Attenuator, man.
I always try to break the chain. I'm like, I need to not hit the brakes here. Let the car slow down. Try to break the chain, but I know what you mean. It just it caterpillars.
But that's more of your awareness, and I think most people aren't wired that way. Most people are lemmings. Most people are looking at the bumper right in front of them. They're not thinking about the 2-second rule. They're not thinking about, hey, if this goes south and it starts pulling to the wall, what recourse do I have? What's my exit strategy?
Yeah.
Riding a motorcycle for many years made me a really great driver. Less distractions, more it was like a stick shift. You're connected to the road, anticipating everyone on the road to do the most stupid thing at every possible second. Makes you more alert of a driver.
It's scary though, because every rock you pick up and look underneath is not like there's not much happiness. Like, oh, what's coming in the future under this one? Like, oh man, I don't want to look under that one. Then you like check another one, and you're like, oh, that's not so hot either. Like, every turn you make is like, oh man, like.
How do you deal with that?
I just think that every situation can be handled. Like, if it has been done, you can do it. You know, it's like the classic Marcus Aurelius quotes of like, you will push through whether you're homeless on the street or you're in a mega mansion. You all push through the same way, that there's not really much outside source besides like a nuclear explosion or some natural disaster that is going to cause the hardship to be so exponential that I won't make it to the other side of it.
So it's kind of like this too shall pass, grin and bear it. Or more, like you said, Marcus Aurelius, the obstacle is the way. Like, focus on the problem at hand, deal with it, accept fate exactly as it is in that moment. You know, do the next right thing, be honorable, and you will get through it. You'll get to the other side and make good come from it.
Yeah, like you can cushion yourself as much as possible to any thing that could come at you, you know, totalitarian government or pharmaceutical industry accidentally leaks a bunch of stuff into the water supply. Like, who knows what it is? You can cushion yourself as best you can, but you're just going to have to deal with it. No matter what.
Speaking of Marcus Aurelius and Stoic principles, I mean, and the Serenity Prayer itself is like, what part of it can you control? Mm-hmm. You know, what can't you control? And it's not worth wasting your energy, effort that could better be utilized for the stuff that you can control. And are you wise enough to know the difference between those two? Yeah. And that's a true Stoic principle.
I like the movie Martian a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And at the end of it, he's giving a speech, and he's like,
yeah, that's right.
He's like, you just do the next thing. You just solve the next problem. And then after that, you solve the next problem. Like, you just keep going. And that's kind of...
That was a brilliant movie for illustrating a very important, complex, hard to show in a Hollywood movie. I thought, you know... And in a movie, you'll talk about changing culture, or I mean, time periods and generations. I don't think my kids could make it through the movie like that, because it required like what we would consider now to be sustained attention. A lot of these movies did. And the further back you go, the slower pace they were. Like, we don't have any Andy Griffith show anymore. Like, we've got, like you said, reality TV, and it's fast paced, and it's you got to feed the monkey, man. You got to hit the dopamine button on these masses of people. This isn't about family time sitting down watching Leave It to Beaver anymore. Yeah. And so I don't even know that my kids would be able to have the appreciation of attention to really get some of these higher life, you know, experiences, principles they're trying to illustrate through arguably some unpopular Hollywood movies like Interstellar or what was the one with Leo DiCaprio where he bent, you know, the mindscape one?
Inception.
Inception.
I don't even have to think about that, because I know from my wife's experience that she doesn't have that attention span, I don't think. But, you know, women are a little different, I think, on the sci-fi and like the most, by and large, women.
Did she hear this?
Yeah.
Come, because she knows where I live.
She may show up.
Okay.
I think by and large, women have a different mindset on entertainment than us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's different than the content. It's more the process of delivery that's weird to me.
I tried to have her watch Idiocracy.
Oh, great movie.
Because I felt that was an important documentary.
Great movie. Yes.
at the time, it was I don't know if they had a crystal ball or what, but
well, Mike Judge
nailed it.
Like Matt Groening. I mean, they had sort of this tongue-in-cheek extrapolation version of the future that was definitely prophetic, but probably wasn't fully appreciated at how soon that it would potentially come true. Because I remember the first time I watched Idiocracy, I was kind of like, okay, I don't really get this movie, and like it's fantastic that, you know, they're dramatizing what might be one day.
Yeah.
It's a documentary, like you said.
Like the technology just not working, all this infrastructure not working.
We can't figure it out.
All like the language becoming just like a mix of just like street
slogans.
Yeah. Everything about that movie is
the
just
advertising
absurd.
on the shirts, like, we're giving it electrolytes. When won't they grow?
Yeah. I know. I wonder if Dax Shepard, because he talks a lot, I wonder if he's talked much about the, you know, how that kind of turned into a reality on him.
I bet that he has, because he's a really deep guy. He's a guy in recovery, which I relate to. He's really deep and genuine and seems authentic. I mean, I don't know any of these people personally, but, you know, even Kristen Bell, his wife, you know, you can tell a lot usually about the way that a married couple interacts and like what they value and stuff like that.
Yeah, he's a car guy. He doesn't live in Hollywood, so he's probably more understanding of this stuff, I would venture to guess.
Yeah, and I think that movie, you know, there's a reason why actors take roles in the first place. So he saw something in it at that time. I mean, unless it was just dumb luck.
Because it was like an indie movie. It wasn't like a big blockbuster movie. It was kind of like a smaller comedy. Like they were making comedies like that at the time. They don't really anymore. But yeah, that one's really important. And I think another one that nailed a lot of human life is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
That's a good one. I read that book when I was a kid. That was one of the more milestone books.
That's funny. I hear a lot of people say that.
Yeah,
that book is a milestone book.
It was for me. I mean, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I read all kinds of stuff. Which is weird because engineers aren't usually big readers, but I was a big sci-fi guy, and probably a little psycho-spiritual fantasy as well. I liked Carlos Castaneda. I read Isaac Asimov. Like I read a lot of the Stephen Hawking, anything physics related. We've talked a lot about the new physics. Got into Tesla, any of that is just stimulating the frontier of science
like Nikolai Tesla, not Tesla the car company.
Right.
For anybody that might the real Tesla. I've often thought it was a little disrespectful to kind of, you know, steal his name for the car company because I don't know, just felt a little odd to me.
Yeah, well, he got a lot stolen from him, so
almost everything.
I don't think he would notice.
Yeah, he's probably his life too, if you really dig down into it. But yeah, there's so much interest there in these movies. I don't know. I try to get Bronte to watch them, and she doesn't.
Well, she tries to get you to watch the rom-coms, and you don't either, brother.
I know. I try to get into it, but even her, she doesn't have the attention span for that stuff.
Yeah.
But I was diagnosed with audio. What is it? Something processing. I can't think of it.
Auditory processing?
Yes.
Do you need me to undiagnose it? I know a guy.
Yeah. I need you to undiagnose it.
You are officially not auditory processing, my friend.
Yes. I was diagnosed with that, and they were basically like, you focus on everything in the world at the same time. And I'm like, great.
It's one of your superpowers.
That's what I imagined it until you're in a crowded restaurant and you hear everything going on around you.
We all are spectrums. We're all spectrums of learning. We're all spectrums of autism. We're all spectrums of bipolar. It's how you classify, and we need to do those systems in order to large scale, you know, create diagnosis and treatment, and you know, put people in boxes to some degree. But you got to be really careful as to the why you're doing that and what it's costing you. And so to say like, oh, you have got processing disorder and we're going to need you to hold you back, or we're going to need you to get extra tutoring, or rather than how are you processing information? What's the best environment that's available to you that's going to cause you to thrive and realize your genius?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite, all my Star Trek episodes are favorite. I'm a little bit of a Trekkie, but there's a really good one called Masterpiece Society where people are genetically engineered to become a certain profession. You know, like you were born to be the mayor. That's just what we genetically design you to be. And you were born to be, you know, a pianist, a concert pianist. And it makes you think about how we extrude people through these different systems and ask them to essentially be something that they're not and isn't to their highest potential.
Yeah.
So I undiagnose you, sir.
Appreciate that, because
That'll be
I vividly
$94.
remember I was in a room probably about this size, and there was like boxes all around with like puppets, and like they could basically like fire it up, and like there'd be a million things going at once, and then they'd be like, what was the blue puppet wearing, or what did it say? And like I'd have to like give them what it said, and they're like, okay, he saw everything in the room instead of what we were telling him to look at. He's screwed up. I don't know what to tell you,
Come
Kelly.
to my house, man. You won't see anything.
Yeah, they were like, he's just screwed up. And that damaged me probably more than having it was telling me I was diagnosed as broken, basically.
The prostitution rests. Proving my point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is damaging.
And you don't realize that until you're an adult, that even psychology, like bringing kids to therapy can be damaging.
Yeah, it depends the reason. You know, are you trying to do conversion therapy and make them less gay? Are you trying to do like psychodynamic or cognitive behavioral when this kid really needs to like punch a pillow? I mean, absolutely. Trauma therapy can actually, is one area you can actually hurt and further traumatize kids or adults for that matter.
Yeah, and I've known therapists and they were more damaged than most people.
Yeah, some of the best therapists are usually the ones that have walked the walk. You know, they've lived through it. Unfortunately, the proverbial therapist, like your marriage counselor's been divorced 3 times, or you know,
those kind of therapists where they're just
the
like,
weight loss experts, 300 pounds, and it's hard to take them seriously. But
it's like 50 years of school, and they can talk to you for $200 an hour.
But therapists do generally get a bad rap because I think now more than ever, it's really important to have someone, like you said, that you can connect with, that you can trust, that you can confide in, somebody objective, somebody who's not judgmental, somebody who's professional and actually knows some of the processes, the mental processes, the programs that we run, how to mitigate them, how to identify them, how to modulate them, how to remove the fangs from trauma, for instance, or teach you to process information better, whether that's ADHD, like. They don't get they kind of like teachers. I think generally they're good eggs. They have good intentions. They have good motives. Sometimes they do bad stuff. Sometimes they make poor judgments. They're humans. Yeah. They sleep with patients or whatever. But by and large, yeah, I'm a big fan of therapy, both individual and group.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, I've talked to therapists before in my life, but not something I've tried to make a habit of, mostly just because, I don't know, maybe the male in me doesn't like talking about my problems, because if you can get past them, that seems like the best route to me, rather than just living them up every now and then.
Well, so I think that's what a good therapist does, is they try to facilitate the impasse. They try to identify where you're stuck and hold a mirror up to you for you to actually make the recognition, to be motivated to make the changes. Where it fails is when you have someone who's not really invested in it, somebody who's obligated to do it, somebody who's not paying for it and is like not having to drive across town during the middle of their day. Like, they just don't want it as badly. They don't want to understand why they are the way that they are. They don't have that motivation. They're like failure to thrive, or, oh, I'm being made to do this by my employee assistance program or my parents or whatever. And sometimes that works too. You fake it until you make it.
Yeah, I mean that, and I guess a good therapist would get past the not wanting to be there.
Good Will Hunting.
Yeah.
That'll take you back.
I haven't watched that one in a while.
Another Matt Damon movie.
Yeah. A lot of references.
2 for 2 there.
Yeah. We were talking about, like, what is it in the brain that's destroyed now? Is the pineal
gland, yeah.
Pineal gland. That one interests me a lot.
Yeah, and interested Rene Descartes, too. He described it as the seat of the soul, which I actually do believe. It seems like a perfect neuroanatomical structure for any psycho-spiritual energy to communicate through the transceiver I was talking about to a higher self, whether that's an etheric being, a soul, a katra, if you're a Vulcan.
So that's interesting to me, because that alone, you get into like the pseudo, what most people that have probably spent their whole life in like being treated or in medicine would probably start to call you a crazy person.
Don't tell it to the Chinese. They've been doing it 5,000 years. Don't tell it to the Vedics, you know, in India.
So Western medicine
yeah.
would...
But look, how long ago did we not have an EKG? Yeah, we didn't even know the heart was electrical. How long ago did we not have EMG, where they stick electrodes in your muscle to measure, like, you know, the little frog movement experiment you did in school? How long ago did we not have an EEG showing brain waves? Right now, we need, like, you know, an electrochiogram machine. And some people argue it's already out there, whether that's Rife Machine or Spooky Twos, or there's all kinds of devices that biomeridian devices that supposedly, and I do believe, measure some of the more subtle energetic biofrequency variabilities that we all are constantly admitting. I mean, every cell has 0.7 millivolts of potential gradient. You know how batteries work, a galvanic cell. Add in trillions of cells, you're talking about like some crazy amount of energy, like 30,000 kilowatts or something. Makes you think a lot different about spontaneous human combustion. It makes us a lot understand about how much power we have energetically, and it can increase and decrease. And you know, auric fields, mine is interacting with yours right now because we're within 6 feet and we can get on the same wavelength. A lot of the language we use, think about it.
Yeah. Well, like if somebody's in a room with you and you don't know they're in the room, like you walk into a room and somebody's hiding, you almost get like you feel it.
How do you know?
There's something there. I don't know if it could be measured by any tools we have now, but like you feel it. I know humans even have like early primitive stuff of like seeing faces everywhere and that kind of thing.
Pleomorphism, yeah. I mean, bat echolocation. But to your point, if that person was hiding inside a cabinet, it's not like there's some sound, normal ambient sound that's bouncing off an object behind you that your primitive, regressed, bat-like echolocation skills are picking up on. No, if they're hidden, if they're acoustically hidden, how do you get the feeling somebody's watching you? I mean, that's remarkable. That's some fringe stuff right there. No,
well, even people like, you know, your ears tingle and somebody's talking about you. And that's...
hair stands up on the back of your neck.
Yeah. It's weird how that, like, there's a real connection, it feels like.
Yeah. And I think that ultimately, I think the puppet master that's our soul, that's our higher self, that's God, I mean, however you, like, conceptual it spiritually, I think it reaches down into the 3D plane, because we're just a condensed version of higher dimensional existence, controls, like a puppet master, the meat sack strings. And then we integrate into this space with 5 known senses, right? Touch, taste, hearing, sight, smell. And that's how we consume information. You and I can agree in this consensus reality. We're here in the studio, and you know, we can sense danger, and we rely mostly on our eyesight, which is probably the most unreliable form of witness testimony, by the way. But
yeah. What did like mainstream science claim that this does, this gland?
Well, it is known to regulate circadian rhythm, so the sleep-wake cycles. Like in birds, and our skulls are thin enough that sunlight, natural light, can actually penetrate not just through your eyelids and your eyeballs, which is technically brain tissue, but through some of the thinner bones, like the cribriform plate and some of the sphenoid and deeper structures. And lights, like actual photonic energy, hits the pineal gland, and it helps regulate, you know, serotonin, melatonin, a lot of these circadian markers, controls other glands like the hypothalamus, pituitary.
Weird. So it actually gets light hitting it.
Yeah.
I was even thinking, like, when you're saying about the soul and other, you know, places, like the third eye.
Third eye is also the pineal, yeah.
Yeah, it's been around forever. I mean, I think about some of that historical stuff, and I'm like, well, they weren't just completely making this stuff up when you see it's across multiple different continents.
The Egyptians, you know, the Eye of Ra.
Yeah.
With the third eye. I mean, that goes back. We consider like the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians as some of the earliest, most advanced cultures. There are far more before that, but they get the most credit. And I think the Egyptians had the closest understanding in their art, in their literature, And they were good at recording stuff too, with technology that they had. Of course, they had technology we don't understand still.
Yeah.
But they have a lot of technology that we did, and it was unusually advanced for that time. Of course, they also pulled brains out when they mummified, and like thought the heart was the seat of the soul too.
Yeah, they are definitely, obviously have the weird side of it. But, you know, I've watched enough Ancient Aliens in my life to understand how much confusion there could be in that world of ancient everything and how little we know about that, which makes me think about how much they may have known that we don't know, and societies tend to write things down less as they get more advanced, and how much like if you think about us, like we write down like nothing. Everything's now digital and would be gone in 10 years.
Yep, poof. It's like Matthew McConaughey says in Contact, you know, are we fundamentally better technologically as a species because we have all of this stuff we take for granted? Or were they far better off in Greek and Roman times, or the Egyptian Babylonians? Yeah, they had a lot of hysterical stuff we don't understand, but they also had a lot of wisdom that we don't understand.
Yeah.
And we lost, or we're forgetting, or we're becoming idiocracies ourselves.
In the Unabomber's manifesto, I was thinking about that the other day. He said the Industrial Revolution was a huge mistake.
Yeah, the Kaczynski.
Yeah, and he was MK Ultra'd. He was.
Yeah.
It was proven that he was MK Ultra'd.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he was like, I guess 160 IQ, like high level dude, and his take was the Industrial Revolution was a mistake, which when somebody of high intelligence says that, you gotta think about it a little bit.
Well, and it's an unstoppable mistake. It's that genie that can't be put back in the bottle. I mean, even with a global cataclysm, we would rebuild from there, from the knowledge of that. It might set us back 50, 2,500 years, who knows?
Yeah. But
we would re-evolve. And AI will re-evolve, and it will outpace us.
Mm-hmm. There's an interesting show on Netflix called The Three Body Problem, too.
Oh, yeah.
It was pretty good.
Yeah.
Where there's an advanced civilization on its way here, and they just wanted to confuse humanity, basically, so they could take us over, because they looked and they were like, you guys are too good at war.
Yeah.
We need to slow you down, or else when we get there in 1,000 years, we got no chance.
Yeah.
That was their kind of.
Yeah. I didn't get to the end of it, but I did watch like some of the beginning.
It's got another season, I guess, coming out, but
maybe that's why.
I think it's based on a book too.
Yeah.
So it's not. Yeah. But that's, I guess, the general consensus of.
Yeah.
The thought, and they're probably not wrong on that assessment that in 1,000 years, humans are going to be pretty good at war if we keep on the same.
Well, we've always been good at war.
Yeah.
It's just the cost and the price is so much higher, and the ability, you know, to do mass destruction.
Yeah.
Whether that's bioterrorism, nuclear, or bioweapons, but nuclear weapons. I mean, weapons of mass destruction, really.
Yeah. Bioweapons scare me a lot. A rabbit hole I always end up going down that I really enjoy is like propaganda throughout the years. Whether it's like World War II propaganda. It's like, it's so interesting. It's
disturbing.
Like the arts that they were coming out with, and like things that they would try to use as deception and misinformation.
Well, look at cigarette advertising. I mean, that's a more modern one, you know.
Yep.
Surgeon General prefers camels, you know, and shows them smoking cigarettes. And,
it's crazy.
And then like R.J. Reynolds and their ability to literally brainwash and unscience a civilization is really impressive. It's like to actually pull that off in the age of modern technology.
Yeah.
Should give you some insight into how we're being manipulated, controlled, algorithmically directed.
Well, you look at like even Uncle Sam. A great tool at the time to get young adolescent teen boys to join the military to fight for, they didn't even care what, they were just...
Who doesn't love Uncle Sam?
Exactly.
You know?
But to not identify it as propaganda is, you know, I asked people, I was like, do you think you can identify propaganda when you see it? And everybody's, oh yeah, sure. Yeah. And then you see it and you don't recognize it because it aligns with you.
But that maybe your auditory processing and the way that they were throwing information at you is precisely why you see these things in a way that other people don't. So rather than look at that as some sort of flaw or handicap or learning disability, I guess they would call it, developmental disability, I see it as a superpower.
Yeah.
Like, you could be the savior of humanity, man. Write that down.
Yeah, that's a...
No pressure.
Yeah, not at all. There's that movie where the guy has the glasses on and he sees everybody as skeletons and takes them off and he's like...
Yeah, or the husband glasses. The trash is not full yet. It's like falling out.
Yeah. So another more doctoral thing on the quick... I think this is a very important topic. The cancer that's quickly forming.
Oh yeah.
All of a sudden, I haven't heard anybody talk about this either, and it's as terrifying as anything. Is a fast forming cancer.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that with my own eyes. I think my late partner actually died from one of these rapidly progressive cancers. And I'm not an oncologist, but I do have Western training. I know about the pathogenesis of tumors and different types of cancers, solid tumors, endocrine tumors, blood tumors, and they all went up. They all went up quickly. Everyone knows someone personally that's had like a very sad, aggressive, usually fatal type of cancer, kind of come out of nowhere. And my theory behind that is whether it was specific to COVID itself or the vaccine or that particular virus and its design or the way it interacts with our biology, it created a cascaded series of events that lead some people to have POTS, other people have these wicked, clots, these long blood dyscrasias. I think it challenges the immune system so hard and so long that the nascent cancer cells that we all have are like, well, hey, like the gates of freaking San Quentin are wide open. Like, I'm just going to walk out and wander around and then do what I want. And so you have these precancerous cells with all of the immune surveillance, all of the systems to identify, destroy, keep locked up in their cages, all of a sudden just gates open. And so what might have led to a cancer 30, 50, maybe even 120 years after, later, long after their natural death, is now happening now. It's like, boom, it's switched on, it's turned on, the cascading series of events, all of the sentinel immune surveillance is off. It created the perfect environment, the perfect condition to essentially cause cancer. I mean, it's kind of splitting hairs if you're like, well, no, the vaccine didn't cause cancer or the virus didn't cause cancer. Well, you got cancer because of this injury.
Yeah.
So, how do you want to frame that? Cancer bad, infection bad.
If it's moving quicker as well, because you got it, but then it's also moving quicker, which is a double whammy almost. Getting it is one thing. Okay, you could live with it for a while as it grows, but then all of a sudden it's moving quicker than it did.
Yeah, well, I think it's because, like I said, it's one thing to unlock the gates of this prison, this biochemical or immunologic prison. It's another, once they walk out, to have no one at the guard towers, to have no one on the island,
Yeah.
and it's like...
Thinking about Ghostbusters when he lets them all out.
Oh, yeah, at the end.
Yeah. Well, not even at the end. The government's like, we're shutting you down.
Oh, yeah.
And they went and unplugged it.
Walter Peck.
The government shut them down.
Yeah.
And then the gates open, and then there's the Stay Puft Marshmallow.
All hell breaks loose.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
So it's just, that's crazy. So the COVID, do you think, damaged the immune system? The COVID virus, whether it was introduced through vaccination or through getting it? Because, I had COVID.
You go down two different pathways with that, because some people are very anti-vax and they say, look, there's all this evidence of this graphene and all of this stuff that may or may not have, the impression is it was intentionally put there. That would create a different argument for why they got cancer and why it was rapidly progressive versus the viral effects itself. Because there's a lot of people, and I don't know, nobody's going to study this, or if they do study it, it's going to be probably manipulated, misinterpreted, and is there any more objective truth? But did the people who just got the virus, who never got a vaccine, have the same rapid progressive rate of cancers as the ones that, let's say, never got the virus but only got the vaccine? And then I'd look at a third group, the ones that got both. And I think they were worse because their immune system was repeatedly pounded. Our immune system's great. It will save our life, but it's never a free ride. It always comes at a cost. All these viruses, we have thousands that we're keeping at bay all the time. And they can get let out. That's what shingles is. It's chickenpox reactivated. Mononucleosis, it's Epstein-Barr, reactivated. So you get, herpes flares that people keep getting cold sores and herpes outbreaks. The immune system's smarter than that. It's something's creating that vulnerability to allow it to just break loose. And so whether it's a combination of the virus, the vaccine, or either or, the end result was people were dying. People were getting diagnosed with very rare types of tumors too. Let's not just say like, oh, well, the breast cancer rate went up. There were like rare tumors that shouldn't, it's not that they shouldn't exist. It's just the concentration, if you look at the concentration of rare tumors versus like the prostate cancers and the breast cancers, which are probably environmental toxins and genetic genetic loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger kind of thing. I bet that the vaccine and the virus and the combo of them were directly correlating. Not causality in some cases can be proven, although I think that there is some argument for causality too. But you can get all kinds of permanent injuries from natural infections. Let's just take ones people are more comfortable with, like chickenpox or polio. And some bad stuff can happen. And with those vaccines too, some of the arguably more successful vaccine campaigns like polio in India and smallpox, which is a brutal illness. It's like brutal. It's what ended Marcus Aurelius's life.
Smallpox, yeah.
Yeah, the Antonine Plague was most likely smallpox. It's what wiped out the Native Americans underneath our feet.
Yeah, well, there's like real data on vaccines in like South Africa and like sub-Saharan Africa that like damaged villages of people and like fertility rates. Like there's real evidence of that is you get taken off YouTube or demonetized for talking about this stuff. But it's real proof. It's not fake. It's not made up. But again, like you're saying, there's no money in studying some of this stuff. And if there's no money in studying it, it doesn't get studied. But then there's got to be another level where there's a language barrier. So if they're studying it in China, it's not as, or India or Russia, it's not as easily cross-referenced to the U.S. because there's a language barrier there.
And there's a medical cultural barrier too, or at least a translation that any language you translate, you lose a significant percentage of the true emotional meaning and intent behind even a single word or a set of words or a phrase. So, like, to your point, translate that to scientific literature, and how well does that apply to all cultures and languages and interpretations and constructs and their way that they approach illness and health, because ours is unique.
Yeah, and language even dictates some of that, because, you look at a country like Korea and their language, the way that it is used, it leads more to like better math skills, just the language alone, and the way that they think with the language. And some languages are better for musical skills. They just translate better into that thing. And it's got to be the same across the board for other things like medicine and that kind of stuff. And it's weird to think how the language will impact that and how much we can't get from another country.
And how regulated it is. Like, even if you came up with the world's best discovery, back to Tesla, who is going to benefit from it, and who's going to benefit from, let's say, suppressing it or gaslighting it or manipulating it? I mean, that's part of my beef with the Western education is what I learned in medical school came from a bench 20 years prior. And how many people had their hands in those 20 years in manipulating the information, the studies, the data, the intent, the funding, the distribution. I mean, there's so many people involved and there's so much time. And then you've got a 20-year time gap in the evolution of understanding itself. And so, you know, I vividly remember the first day of my second year of med school, them coming in and saying, hey, good news and bad news. Good news is 10% of what we taught you last year, it's wrong. And I'm thinking like, okay, if that's the good news, what the hell's the bad news? Bad news, we don't know which 10%. Okay, so you basically just qualitatively invalidated literally everything that the gospel you gave me the year before.
Yeah.
Which is the best current, you know, evidence. And at the end of my career, young doctors are going to be like, man, those guys are Stone Age. They're morons. They knew nothing. Mm-hmm. I like to constantly learn. I like to constantly think why and understand and evolve with the literature, but it's hard to keep up with. It's hard to know, just like in consuming any other content, like what's reliable, what's trustworthy. More importantly, what do I see in my practice that helps my patients that actually makes them, you know, better in any measure.
Yeah.
And it's sad to see how many people are hurt, like you said, not just
well, like the half-life of a medical degree is not that long. It's like 5 years is like half of it's gone, and then like another couple years later, the rest of it's all obsolete.
Yeah.
And then even to, I guess, get a little political, you look at somebody like Dr. Fauci, who hadn't seen a patient in 50 years, and he completely fumbled the AIDS epidemic, suddenly being the highest power in the land.
Well, you don't see a lot of old doctors. They don't live as long. It's a high-stress lifestyle. Like you said, they kind of have their own... They don't plan for their obsolescence. It's plans for them because the pace and the content, the delivery changes so fast. It's almost impossible for anyone to keep up with unless, like you said, you entered training at that point. It's so hard for them to go back and learn concepts that I take for granted, like pharmacogenomics. There are so many doctors out there that don't even know what the hell that is. They don't understand DNA testing.
I'm not a doctor, and I don't know what it is.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's genetic testing, basically. And, you know, every drug you see on TV, if you look on the package insert, it has a whole section on how to, you know, the compatibility, how to dose adjust. And this is like basic, you know, 90s. It's the same technology they used for the COVID testing, actually.
Yeah.
So they didn't know it when they were trained, and they never have learned it. And then they double down, and they're like, well, that must be pseudoscience. And that's like a different layer of ignorance, because it's kind of like, actually, no, that's the current established science in the Western, but I see the flaws in your interpretation and your understanding of the application of medicine, because you think that this is like fringe when you're really a dinosaur kind of thing.
That's actually terrifying.
Yeah, well, I see that every day. I think that's
to
sort of
dispute something that is current proven science as fake and wrong because your older training.
Exactly.
That'd be like being stuck on penicillin as the go-to for everything.
And then not understanding what came before it. Like, one thing that worked really well for COVID was ozone, blood ozone. And, you know, Russians did a ton of this. A lot of cultures did before penicillin antibiotics came out. And then so we're like, oh, well, this is better. It's better, faster, stronger. You take a pill. Everybody, that's more convenient. Let's forget about the standard of care before. The problem is that standard of care is uniquely good for a lot of things antibiotics aren't. COVID was probably one of those things, but we couldn't have a discussion about it. We couldn't have a discussion about IV vitamin C, which even the Chinese had early studies. We definitely didn't want to talk about ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. We would talk about, you know, sticking you on a ventilator and flipping you on your tum-tum and stuffing you in a body bag and holding up the iPad to your loved ones to say goodbye. That's sick.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously wasn't involved in any early COVID care, but from my understanding, listening to the TV, Trump got out there and said, I created more ventilators than any person in human history, N95 masks for everyone except for the people in the medical industry because there was none left. And that was kind of like it was like, oh my God, there's ventilators now finally. And you'd hear like, oh, there's 5 beds for intensive care in a hospital, but we need 200,000. And it's like, oh, because, obviously if you watch CNN at the time, they had a ticker of how many people died.
The body count.
A body count that was just rolling, and you'd see like propaganda again of like, oh, we have 12 freezer trucks outside of our hospital because we need them. And it's like, really? Or are you just trying to scare me to stay in my home? What's the truth here? Or is this, does this get people to watch the news? Because obviously advertisers like that.
If it bleeds, it leads.
So all of that is just like so scary to look back at. And, I think if we don't learn from the past, we're doomed to repeat it.
That's what I was going to say is the scariest is not learning, not recognizing. Now that we've calmed down relatively, to be able to learn from our mistakes. I mean, I said the same thing about 9/11, and I knew that we were angry. I knew that there was venge, and that's the American way. Like you don't punch me. You don't want to know the hell I will rain down on you. And we were all hurt, and we were all scared, we were all sad, but we also handed up a lot of freedoms, like you said. We also lost our presence of mind. We also reacted emotionally, which is, in hindsight, would have been different. We probably wouldn't have invaded a sovereign third world, a country in those terms in that timeline, looking for these weapons that didn't exist, etc. But he was a bad dude. I mean, it's easy for us to like Monday morning quarterback, and I'm glad I wasn't making those decisions. But the thought, I vividly remember those thoughts at the time, and trying to have oh wait, this is one of those times where we should really like kind of pause, pray, proceed, and not just react like a violent person cutting you off on the interstate and like, gonna blow them away. And
rational minds always prevail. I mean, I have to go through this with my wife all the time. It's like, if something is going wrong, panicking will only make it go wrong more.
Do you have a bed out here?
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Yeah, I figured.
It's about right.
I figured you did. So
yeah,
he won't be in tonight.
Sorry, Bronte. But it's true. It's like I always try to get her back to that, like get back on a solid ground and then make a decision.
Well, and it's part of their superpower. I think that divine feminine, the way they process emotions, empathy. Integrate multiple inputs, it would be overloading. I mean, I think if we were wired that way, we would overload as well. And that's why the dyadic evolution of this male-female archetype and I think is important. How that relates to like, gay marriage and some of the more complex issues is a different conversation. But it's what gives us strength in that couple balance that I think. The wisdom of living together, working together, kind of that fracture repair model of the way that we stress and regress in different ways, the way that we become single, one-track minded, fix the problem, protect, provide. That really sets the conditions for a super healthy relationship. And then you can do ego lending, like to your point, with her, and vice versa. She can say like, hey, slow down, like, time to punch out now. Like let's tend to wounds. Let's think about healing and processing emotions, and kind of that moment after you crash the car, the Y2J into the wall, and the emotions kind of calm down. Like, whoa, that happened. Like I've got to feel it here to heal it, type of moment.
I was actually talking to my dad last night, and my dad doesn't talk about really anything, but emotions wise. And
I've heard him talk.
Yeah, and he. My youngest sister was like, man, Dad, you never say you love us. And he's like, didn't I make sure you had breakfast? Didn't I clean off the bike seat? It was wet this morning. I cleaned it off before you got out there. He's like, didn't I fold your laundry? And she's like, yeah, but you never say I love you. And he's like, well, yeah, but like you tell your friends you love them, and you tell the dog you love them. And it's like you've ruined the word.
It's sort of like the acts of service versus the words of affirmation in the different love languages.
I know, and I thought about trying to tell him about that, but I was like, I think we're a little too far from that still.
Oh boy.
Yeah, exactly. But it's funny, my sister saying that, but he's like, you feel it, right? She's like, yeah, but you never say it, and he's like, yeah, but it's there. You feel it.
I say it with my actions.
Yeah.
And that's your way out of that, I guess.
That's my dad's mentality.
It's funny. I kind of grew up that way. I never heard that. I never, even my mom, I love her to death. I know she loves me, but, at the end of the conversation, it's usually like, hey, love you. Bye. And I think it's the product of upbringing to some degree based on like our parents' generation. But I do what the shrinks call reaction formation. I do sort of the opposite. My girls and my boy, which I need your help on figuring out, by the way. I tell them every day how much I love them because I don't want them to ever say that. I don't want them to feel like well, geez, that's odd. They don't say that. And the whole concept of good enough parenting is you provide clothing, food, shelter, and love. And that's literally all kids need. I mean, according to some psycho theories.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, you do look at the world and kids are crazy and you wonder, well, what went wrong there?
Yeah.
You see someone is a school shooter and you wonder what went wrong. And I know we've talked a little bit about like SSRIs and putting kids on medication that is way more damaging than putting an adult on medication.
Yeah.
And the fear there. And you see that as a parent and you're like, well, how do I avoid that? Like, that's worst case scenario. How do you avoid that? What steps do I take now with a 9-month-old that avoids that?
Yeah, Hitler was someone's little baby. He was a cute little bundle of joy to someone.
A painter.
Yeah. But, to your point, the whole SSRI things in kids, I mean, that's why there's a black box warning. That's like the highest risk of like pharmaceutical injury potentially are black box warnings. Like people are like, oh, hey, I prescribe stuff all the time and I'm pretty dang conservative. But I get people all the time like, oh, hey, I Googled that and there's a kid in Pakistan whose cousin's brother's mother said he heard a friend on the bus say that, Prozac was bad or whatever. And it's that level of evidence isn't what you should be putting your weight into. I mean, you should have some common sense and ask yourself, is this right for my kid? Know the data. But when there are arguable warnings, like black box warnings by the manufacturer themselves saying like, oh, by the way, this 24-year-old kid, if given this drug, will fly a plane into a building in Tampa, which is part of where that black box warning came from. Maybe you put a little bit more credence in that. And more importantly, wouldn't it be cool to trust your doctors again? Like to actually trust. Like, hey, doc, I don't know. This is what you do all day, every day. The internet's terrifying. I don't know what to sort out, but I trust you. Tell me what to do. Like those days are gone. This ain't no Norman Rockwell painting in the 50s where like they told you what to do and you said, yes, sir, and did it. And we don't need to return to that, but the pendulum has swung to my doctor's an idiot. I can do a Google search. I know more. And a lot of times you do, by the way, because their access to information is so great. And your algorithm, not just of your AI, but of your life circumstances, your epidemiology, whatever your health struggle is, you're going to be an expert in trying to seek information. Whereas your doctor may be an expert in that field and may have clinical experience, but also wears a lot of handcuffs, a lot of blindfolds, has a lot of mistresses, has their own blind spots, has their own, agenda, consciously or unconsciously. And I do think that doctors, they were good kids, they had good intentions, they wanted to help people, and they became products of the medical education and the infrastructure of the practice and the delivery of managed care by big pharma oversight and insurance-based driven, remuneration. And in the end, what's squeezed out at the end is doctors as we now know them. And nobody really truly trusts them. Some of the elderly still do, which is interesting when I get old. I had a 93-year-old woman, and it was an amazing experience. Like, wow, this person trusts me. I'm half her age, and just because I'm a doctor, like, I wonder what that would have been like to practice in that time and not have 400 people in my chair with me trying to kill you.
Yeah.
Well,
like, even I was watching a documentary on Wyatt Earp the other day, and, his brother was shot in the leg, and they were like, his brother got really lucky because they brought him to the only doctor that believed that it was a good idea to wash your hands in the tools before you did surgery. Yeah. It's like, wow, what a weird thing to hear.
Yeah.
Like, he was the only doctor around in the time. They all thought he was crazy. Like, you washing up before you cut this bullet out of someone? And even the way that they said they would find the bullet, he would take a sharp, pointy thing and they would poke until they found it, but they would just keep poking in dirt and debris into your skin in a bunch of different spots. And I was like, oh my God. So, like, somebody like me back then would have known probably vastly more than that doctor. And I don't know anything about surgery.
Yeah, and maybe that's the problem, is they tend to, through the practice, get this like hyper myopic interpretation or vision of illness and health and interventions, and rarely do they ask, should I do this? It's can I? What's
like
the standard
vision.
of care? The medical legal threat is real. Like, well, if I don't give this person an antibiotic, and something bad happens, they're going to say, why didn't you give them an antibiotic? That's the gold standard. That's the standard of care. Why did you give them IV vitamin C instead of, amoxicillin? So there's a medical legal fear there. I'm well insured and well intentioned, and I do what I believe is right. And out of all the COVID that I treated, I had one guy end up in the ICU for less than 24 hours, and they told him, you're the only person to make it out of here this month alive, number one. And number two, you have the shortest hospital ICU stay of anyone that we've had at this hospital since the pandemic started.
Wow. That's very scary and very eye-opening to what was going on.
Well, and it just shows you, like, Linus Pauling and orthomolecular medicine and everything we knew about vitamin C in the 50s kind of had some universal practicality. Could have saved a lot of lives. I believe did and would have saved more. Introducing the ozone treatments. I mean, what is the risk versus reward ratio? If we're really thinking like allopaths, why can't we even have a discussion? Why can't we say, well, when I was in Miami, we had a bioethics board, and we had a old Haitian woman, and the family wanted to treat her with blue scorpion venom. And we had a discussion about this in a bioethics committee. Like, hey, do you guys know anything about blue scorpion venom? No. Do you think it will help this person? No. Do you think it'll hurt this person? Probably not. Do you see any bioethical problems with introducing this to help with the cohesive family unit? And we all anticipate that this metastatic, cancer or whatever is odds are 95% going to take this person's life. Is the risk reward there in terms of what it will provide the family in terms of their sense of knowing they tried to do everything, being culturally sensitive? Like, all of that should be a conversation that we did not even want to have. We were threatened to have. I can't tell you, I got warnings from the Department of Health, like, you prescribe ivermectin, you lose your license. And all my patients that were on hydroxychloroquine for, immune illnesses, they got screwed because their doctors were terrified. Their pharmacists were, like, reporting them.
Yeah, so they're already on it pre-COVID.
Oh, yeah.
They were already on ivermectin pre-COVID.
Yeah, or hydroxychloroquine was more common.
So the two things that you couldn't, and then once it becomes, outlawed in a way, then suddenly they're left without the care they need.
Yeah, and I mean that in my health career, the only other thing I saw that was like as much of a blatant interference by local government, and again, my license is issued by the state, was the Terry Schiavo case, which was this woman that had a bad eating disorder, and she got like really low potassium hypoglycemia, basically stopped her heart. They resuscitated her, and she was a vegetable for like 27 years on hospice. And there was this big fight at the end of her life to pull the plug or not pull the plug. And, the family, half of the family was for it. The other half of the family was, and the governor ended up coming in and weighing in on this case. And it's like, at what point did we mix politics and medicine to such a shockingly invasive, like inappropriate invasion of autonomy?
Yeah, I mean, the Constitution, from my understanding, says nothing about weighing in on medical cases for a reason. And I think it's probably best left that way, where government stays out of medicine as much as possible. If they're not directly protecting a human life, I don't see them being any involvement. It's frustrating. It's very scary to know that the government could get in the way of me or my son having the care he needs.
And religion too. I saw that a lot in Miami, because I can't project my personal beliefs, whether that's as a doctor, whether that's a religious, spiritual beliefs. I cannot be an effective clinician and healer or physician if I'm projecting my crap. And so I can't tell you how many Jehovah's Witness I saw, and I had the conversation personally, like, look, you've been in an accident, you're bleeding out, all you need is a blood transfusion or else you will die. Okay, I understand. My faith is very clear on this. I don't want a blood transfusion. Okay, so let me repeat. I do basic informed consent. Again, this is a bioethics thing. This is informed consent of if you understand the risks, the alternatives. You're not being influenced by depression or suicidality or an outside force. There's a lot of like little metrics that go into it, but it's a basic medical decision doctors make every day, and should be prepared when global pandemics and stuff like that hit, or mass casualty events or something like that. And I watch them die for not getting the blood transfusion. And I personally am totally okay with that because they made an informed consent consistent with their faith, knowing they were going to leave their kids behind, and they were okay with that. That I might think is crazy from my personal opinion, but I'm totally at peace knowing that I did right by that patient.
Yes.
And so that's a whole other level of like the ethical or religious fun fact in the state of Florida, if they try to do that for their child under 18, the law actually prevents them from doing that. So it assumes that a kid under 18 doesn't have the capacity to make that decision, and therefore their parents can't make it for them. But this differs from state to state, like right to die, Arizona or Washington, the old Kevorkian gone bad.
Well, even Canada has some crazy laws about, if you want to commit suicide, you can have doctor-assisted suicide as it's like a 30-year-old person. Just like, I've had enough. And it's like, man, that's dark. It's scary.
But as long as they've been...
And I understand it, like you're a consenting adult, but like...
Yeah, those are tough decisions. It's sort of, like I said, mass casualty, realizing you have two people, you can only save one. Which one is the greatest potential to live?
The trolley, a
childbearing woman or the old man. I mean, all things being equal, that's an easy decision. But they're never easy decisions.
Well, like we've even talked about Fukushima. When that happened, like the elders went in to shut it down. It was like a crazy self-sacrifice of like, we are the elders. We are, we're not sending a 28-year-old kid in there that works at like... Yeah. And that kind of stuff is really powerful and very Japanese of them.
It is very Japanese and extremely... One of the things I admire about their culture and that wisdom is, like you said, the presence of mind to more have that autoscopic view of the situation, kind of what Marcus Aurelius called the top-down, like the ants on the earth and the soldiers on the battlefield and the arbitrary lines drawn on the earth and all of that. They can see the situation for what it is. And, some of this is well established. Some of it we don't even question, like women and children in the lifeboats first, right? Yeah. But some of it is got to be done out of the presence of mind and the knowledge of the entirety of the situation and where you fit in on it. The old unwinnable scenario. Are you going to be the one that knock some of the women and children out of the lifeboats, to sneak on, or are you going to be the captain that goes down with the ship?
Yeah, and it's all crazy. Well, we'll end it off here. I will almost guarantee this will happen again. I'm probably 100% chance that we'll do this again because it was
do this all night, man.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to completely overwhelm people on the first hit, I guess you could say, of this kind of stuff because it's very, a lot of it is very complex to understand. I try to keep up with it the best I can, so I'd only imagine people that haven't already had some of these conversations trying to keep up with the swirlingness of all this. But how can people I always end this with how can people find you? And
The internet's, man, technology.
I know. Like, it always ends with how can people find you, and people plug their social medias. But you're a different case.
My social media marketing people aren't here, but, you know, Mind Body Medicine of Florida is the name of my practice in Sarasota, and I really do specialize in a lot of these chronic treatment refractory conditions people have, like neurologic to, you know, immunologic. So the chronic Lyme, the mold, heavy metal specialty is what I focus mainly on, and travel and teach a lot of the allopaths and osteopaths alike, because it's something I live through personally, so I've got extra letters behind my name. But we really focus on the mind, the body, and the spirit, and integrating them all, and healing people from not just the ravages of the healthcare system, but the consequences of the pandemic, and looking forward to teaching people and empowering them about their health. So that's the best plug that I got. I'm sure there's a hashtag somewhere in there.
No, I'll put all that stuff in the description to your website and everything like that. And if anybody has any questions or topics of interest, leave them down in the comments, and maybe we can touch on some of that next time, because you are a huge wealth of knowledge, and that's why I always, whenever CJ has a sniffle or anything, or you gave me an IV recently, we didn't even touch on that stuff, but there's way more depth of knowledge than we even scratched the surface of. So if anybody's got anything of interest for Mark here, we'll try to get him on again for some more
medication time.
Yes, exactly. As Mr. Hankey would say. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on, man. That was awesome. But
Thanks for having
that'll
me,
do it.
bro.
We'll see you guys next time.